Hi, and welcome again to another one in our series of stories about careers in ergonomics and human factors. It's a great discipline. It's about designing for people across all aspects of life and work. So the possibilities for a great career are huge, whatever your interest or your background. So that's what we're trying to illustrate really with these career stories. There are lots of ways you can get into it. We thought it'd be great to hear direct from some of our members about how they started in the discipline, about their journey and their experiences so far. So today I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Robin Ellis. He's a human factors consultant and he's going to talk to me about his story. So Robin, welcome and thanks for taking the time to do this. Before you discovered human factors, tell us a little bit about your background.
So I'm doing industrial design at Loughborough University, and human factors or ergonomics, whichever you want to call it, came up on some of the lectures because obviously Loughborough is the centre of ergonomics in the whole world, and so it really piqued my interest. As if, well, suddenly, well, why designing for people? Well, surely that's the most obvious thing. So pretty much straight after that, I did a master's at Birmingham, and that's where I started.
Fantastic. So you had enough interest to take on a course, and how did that go?
It was interesting. It wasn't as much fun as the design course, I don't think, because I sort of really wanted to stay towards design, and because ergonomics human factors is such a wide area. There was a lot of psychologists on the course and physios on the course, and only a couple of designers. So it was a different experience, but it was good because it sort of broadened my view of all the things that might be involved. It was a very different experience, but it was a very valuable one, and it allowed me basically to start doing what I do now way back then from the thesis project that we had.
Can you tell us a bit about that project, or maybe you want to talk about your first job in HF?
Well, I mean, they sort of follow one another. So the thesis project I did, they had a lot of projects that you could do for your thesis that didn't really appeal to me too much. And so I wanted to do something design-based. And I said, well, can we go and find our own? And they said, yeah, good luck. Go and find your own. So I contacted several people, and one of which was Royal Mail, who at the time had a very big ergonomics human factors team. And they wanted to do this project looking at a pannier or a bag for a bike, because back then posties had bikes. That was my thesis project. And pretty much since then, I've been getting work from Royal Mail. Basically, that was the start of my career, working for them, doing the thesis project, doing it well enough that they thought, yeah, he's quite good, and working for the team from there. And that's how it all started for me.
Wow, that's a great point, I think, sort of looking for those sort of projects that really make a difference, even at that stage, that early stage. And it leads, who knows where it leads, but for you, it was a good thing.
I think one of the things is you have to sort of get out and contact people. And you never know. I mean, I don't know how many people I contacted. It was a long time ago, but it was more than just one, but all you need is one. All you need is one. So you get a lot of people say, yeah, it's interesting, but we're not interested in doing that right now. But it's really important to at least try, and don't accept stuff that you think, oh, that's not very interesting. Try and get something more interesting if you can, that is important to you. That would be something I would definitely recommend people do.
Yeah, that's a great example. And personally, I did a year out during my degree, also from Loughborough, at Vauxhall Motors on the assembly line, and that was amazing. I lived off that for several years afterwards. But that I got through a contact of a contact, and it shows that it's really important, I think, even at that stage, as you said, not to accept something that doesn't really pique your interest, and you don't think is that valuable necessarily. So good point. So where did you go from there then? Because now you, but presumably there's something between those two.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, I worked for them for quite a while, and I think the difficulty about having a consultancy is getting work. That's easily the thing I dislike most about what I do, is the getting the work. So I'm not a salesperson, and I do a bit of business development, a bit of networking, but there's people who get paid a lot of money to do business development, and I don't want to be a business development manager. I want to be a human factors ergonomics design consultant, and so I think it was really, and has always been really helpful for me for my career, to have a client who's fairly stable. Most years I have done at least one project with Royal Mail. There's the odd year that I haven't, and there's the odd year that I'm doing lots with them. But I think that's really important if anyone wants to start a career in actually consulting. You need a plan. You need to really understand if it's going to work, but you really need your first client. That's so important. And yeah, so with Royal Mail giving me enough work to allow me not to have to get a proper job, I then looked for other work, and through my contacts there, I've done a lot of work with Post Office over the years, and various other areas from retail to banking to medical products to consumer electronics products. But it is about people who I mean, I've got some work for Nokia several years ago through a guy I used to work with at Royal Mail. So it's all about your network and building that, and do a good job, and people sort of remember you, which is always important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great advice there about, and I think you're right. I mean, ours is the human factors community is fairly small. We know that. So a lot of it is, if you can find a niche, I think sometimes, or a particular strong customer, then I think that's really helpful. Can you just tell us a little bit about when you first set up your consultancy? Because there'll be a lot of people sort of watching this who might have just graduated, say, thinking about, I want my own consultancy, and it's not quite as easy or as as attractive necessarily at the beginning as it sounds. You mentioned obviously the difficulties of perhaps finding work, but the practicalities of setting something up. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
The practicalities are actually fairly easy. The country we live in, the United Kingdom, whether that's just England in the future, who knows, but setting up a company in this country is fairly easy. And there's different ways to go. You can be a sole trader, you can be a partnership if you've got someone else you want to work with, you can be a limited company. Getting a decent accountant's important, but the actual rules about setting it up are fairly easy. And I think the key is basically to get some work. And even at my grand old age, being in consultancy for a long while, it's so important you have experience, because I get work that I don't get, or I have opportunities for work that I don't get because I don't have the experience in that sector, even though I've got 20 plus experience as a consultant. So I think if you're coming straight out of university, unless you get really lucky like I did and managed to have a client there who was happy enough with what I was doing to keep giving me work to tide me over while I tried to get other work, I think it's something you probably will come into later in your career when you have the experience, because if you're competing against consultants who've done that work or a similar thing before, it's a big risk to take. And I think some companies are really interested in pounds and pence. Some companies want a good job. And if they have to pay a consultant a few thousand more and they know he's going to or she is going to do a good job, then that is what they will do, rather than a young guy who's full of enthusiasm but has got no track record. So I think it's really important that sector experience is massive. Experience, like you were saying, your experience in your year out at Vauxhall, that's huge. You get an experience like that, and suddenly work jobs become available because you've done it before, you've seen it before. Rather than, I've never seen this, I reckon I could do it. And I think the thing about ergonomics human factors is mostly the tools, the techniques, they're all kind of the same, but it's still important to clients whether you've done a medical device product, if that's what they're working on, or whether you've worked in this particular sector. They want someone who's done it before, because they don't want risk.
Absolutely. And I think also, a great start sometimes is for people to join a consultancy that's already established, a larger consultancy that can offer you this sort of consultancy environment, but also give you that level of give you some mentorship, give you some experience in different sectors, and some practice with somebody on your shoulder. That's invaluable. And again, when I graduated, I started off in working for a couple of consultancies, and that was fantastic experience. So, something that you could never get on your own, because you don't know that range of contacts or clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
really important. I think then once you've done that and you've got that sort of experience, that's another route to your own consultancy.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I know several people who've done exactly like you say. They worked for a couple of consultancies, and then they thought, well, because I think the thing that happens to these people, that not that it was me, but from talking to them, they start to climb the consultancy ladder, and they get to write the proposals, and they get to look at how much they're charging per day, and then they think about how much salary they get, and they suddenly go, well, hang on, if I'm doing this direct, I can be getting that much per day without, you know, having to just take a salary. So I think, yeah, it's a route that I know a lot of people have gone down.
Yeah, it's and I think the amount of work. I mean, you mentioned earlier, you know, not only Royal Mail, but all the different sort of sectors that you've since worked in, and I think that's great. But you've got to be a bit brave about it, haven't you? And you've got to go out and look and put time into that.
You have, yeah.
A fantastic discipline for giving you that breadth of experience and being able to get into places that you wouldn't normally get into and see jobs being carried out that you'd never experienced otherwise. And one of the things that I find quite, you know, fascinating about it is that you can go into a workplace and have a go at something, you know, you know, safely, obviously, training sometimes, but generally you can have a go. You can sit where people sit, and you can operate what they operate, and various things. Tell us a little bit about what a typical day might look for you as a consultant.
Well, it's kind of strange. I kind of thought you might ask something like that, but it's really weird because right now a typical day is I take full advantage of working for myself. And so I get up, I do a workout, have a shower, have my breakfast, I then, you know, do some work, I'll then walk the dog, and then do some more work. So I think the thing that I love most about being a consultant, I love the work. The work is the most important thing. And I'd rather have the work and have to accept a 9 to 5 or something like that than do a different job. It's not, I'm so enthralled with being my own boss and being a consultant per se, but it is great being your own boss. And, you know, I think so a typical day right now in pandemic world is like that, but it depends exactly on projects. So some projects I'm away from home doing a study somewhere where you're, you know, in, like last year I was in Manchester for a few weeks doing a study there, and then you're staying away and coming back. And other times I'm staying locally and going to visit places to assess things and go to meetings. So yeah, that's the other thing that's great about this discipline. The variety is huge. You know, you're not going to an office and doing 9 to 5 and then coming home, and the next day is exactly the same, and the next day is exactly the same. It is a great career for, just like you said, seeing different things, getting in positions where you wouldn't normally be. But also, I think the other thing about what you just said is really important, and is the best thing about this profession, is you're putting the user first. That's exactly what you're doing. You're doing what you've said. You're putting yourself in those positions so that you can understand what they have to do, and you can understand the pressures and the experiences. And, you know, you can just sit back and sit in your office and design a workstation. But if you actually go and see the people who are doing the task, actually try the task yourself, then suddenly all the things that didn't occur to you because you weren't thinking about them occur to you because you're in that environment.
Yeah. And having that close contact with the people themselves that are doing those jobs means that you start to get that little insight into what their world is like at work. It's not what you imagine. It's, you know, if somebody's doing a really repetitive job, and again, saying I live off the Vauxhall experience for years, there are a lot of people there doing very repetitive assembly line jobs that you think, how could anybody do that? But absolutely they can, and they enjoy it. And so that, you know, it starts to give you that appreciation, I think, when you first set out, that, you know, not everybody is like you and thinks like you. That's the whole you know, point of what we try to do, is that we understand a range of people and how they think and how they work, and, you know, their tolerances and everything else, and how they interact together. And I think that's one of the great things about the discipline as well. I mean, you must have seen it in several of the different sectors that you've worked in.
And I think the other thing that's great is that the thing about a user-centered process, if it's done properly, actually, if you involve the users and listen, and whoever the client is supportive of that process, you basically get a better thing. But you get a better thing not just because you've asked them, but they really buy into it. Yeah. So they're invested into it because, it's blue because I said I wanted it to be blue, or it's this height because I think it works better at that height. And so suddenly you're getting the benefit of it being better anyway, but you're also getting the benefit of buy-in which is huge. Rather than a company enforcing something on somebody, you're asking them, valuing their input, and actually the output from what they do is clear.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other thing that's really important.
Yeah. And you talked a fair bit about your design background and how that's really important to you in your human factors sort of career. Can you think of a really sort of impactful project that you've had that has had design at the centre of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few. I think impactful is interesting because it's one of those things that even if you're doing a single person's workstation, you're making a big impact for that person. But there are projects that I've worked on which have a big impact because it involves a lot of people. A lot of people are getting a better thing because of. And a very early project I worked on, not so much in the last few years, but earlier, not that early in my career, but I did quite a lot of inclusive design type work. And at that point in time, equality was about really a disabled angle rather than gender and religion and sexual preference and all those things that it means today. And I've done a lot of projects with people with disabilities and making the thing, whatever the thing is, whether it's a handheld product or a workstation, accessible to a wide range of people. And because I've got to work with people at Post Office who have a big customer base, or certainly used to have a huge customer base, you can make a big impact by doing some proper work, getting people in, trying stuff, designing from their perspective, and then suddenly you've got a thing which is better because you've asked people and they can then use it. And so from being frightened of, I couldn't possibly use that, we did quite a lot of work when chip and pin first came in. Post Office were the first people to have chip and pin, and all the machines were pretty awful from an accessibility point of view, awful. But we did some work with the supplier and we made some mods, and then suddenly these little old ladies who were petrified of new technology could actually use it and successfully transact their banking. So it was stuff like that is really good to be involved in, and it really has an impact on the users.
There's some great points in there, and I think, as you're saying, the impact you can make is one of the real attractions, I think, about career in this discipline, that you can, you have that real power really to make sort of those changes and make changes to people's lives for the better, which is fantastic. I think we're just going to wrap up in a minute, but just before we go, do you have any advice for people who are thinking about, you did mention about setting up a consultancy and things, but so I think we might have covered that, but if somebody's just thinking about coming into a career in human factors, what would you encourage them into it? I think I know the answer to this one, but what would you
Definitely. I mean, I think, my background is design, and, from a very, very simple perspective, you get more money if you've got human factors as well. I mean, simple as that. You graduate from an industrial design degree, everyone's brilliant, and there are 3 jobs available. But you do another year or you do some studying and you've got ergonomics, suddenly that opens a whole new field to you. And it's a fascinating field. I've been to conferences and spoke to industrial designers who I think that's a pretty cool job. They're bored because all they do all day is design, the same thing for the same company several times in their career. But with this career, you don't get bored. And, the further you get into it, the more doors open up for you, because yes, it is difficult. As I said about sector experience, it's really important, but you can break down these barriers, and you couldn't jump from one sector to an extremely different sector, but you can take steps and move forward. So I think I would encourage anyone to regardless of whether your background's design like mine, or whether you're a physio, or whether you're a psychology based background, I think there's always something interesting about really putting the user first, and you do get to talk to people and you do get to make a difference. And I think that's the real, I could probably make more money working in a bank in London, but I don't want to work in a bank in London. I want to do what I'm doing now. I'm very happy with the choices I've made in my career.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Robin. That's been a really, really, really enlightening story, I think, and hopefully will encourage people into a career. I just want to mention that if you are interested in coming into a career in ergonomics and human factors, there's several routes. You can have any type of background, as we said, there are routes in, there are MSc courses, there are postgraduate certificates offered by many universities, Loughborough included, as we've mentioned, but also Derby, Nottingham, Staffordshire, Cranfield and Coventry. Many of these have accredited courses with us, so they're all on our website, so please take a look there. So thanks again, Robin. It's been really great having this chat. I've certainly learned a lot, and hopefully see you next time. Thanks very much for listening.